It is safe to say if you're just a retail cyclist, you'll never be good at cycling, but in some ways, I could say some competitive cyclists may also never be really good at cycling. You may be like, huh? What do you mean? Why are competitive cyclists not good at cycling? Well, this is really dependent on region and whether or not they go to worlds or nationals, but let me explain as to why you'll always suck at being a cyclist. Starting off, we're going to have to talk about genetic limitations, which is probably the most widely known factor as to why you probably suck at cycling. There are various things that goes into your genetic limitation. The most impactful on cycling are your aerobic capacity, muscle fiber composition, and lactate threshold. Starting with your VO2 max, I'm sure everybody knows what this is. This is the maximum rate at which an athlete's body can consume oxygen during an intense exercise, which means higher VO2 max values are typically found in elite cyclists. Now, if you have asthma like me, you probably won't really have that high of a VO2 max. Now, I'd say some of the things I do while cycling are pretty impressive, especially with having pretty severe asthma. I got a 10-mile time around 27 minutes on a fixed gear, as well as hold pretty consistent 15-mile times under an hour. But if you are not operating in the elite range of a VO2 max, might as well say bye-bye to your elite contract. Fast twitch versus slow twitch muscle fibers affect performance. Endurance cyclists benefit from a higher proportion of slow twitch fibers, but unlike runners, cyclists need slow twitch muscle fibers. These fibers specialize in low intensity sustained activity, such as riding at an endurance pace for a sustained amount of time. They contain a lot of powerhouses of the cell, such as the mitochondria, which they then use effectively to fuel themselves through aerobic metabolism. A lot of big words right there, but I bet you get the point. And lastly, everyone's love an endurance sport, your lactate threshold. I'm sure you heard it. As you work out, the longer you work out, you build up lactic acid within your muscles, which ends up making them slow down and makes you tired and fatigued. Now, within any case of sports, if you have a higher lactate threshold, you're going to be better at that sport. So drink your milk, I guess. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm joking. Lactate, lactose, same thing, I guess. Now leading into your not so physical conditions, and that is the environment and geography that's around you. Now, I'm going to touch on this very briefly, but basically, if you don't have hills where you live, you'll be a pretty sucky cyclist. And also, if you don't really have the infrastructure and training programs where you live, take a guess, you'll also be a pretty sucky cyclist. One major thing within the genetics is genetic testing. And if you get this done to yourself, you can tell whether or not you're going to be a really good cyclist. A few things that are probably the most important genes relative to cycling is ACTN3, and this is known as the speed gene. It influences muscle fiber composition. Variation of this gene can affect the proportion of fast twitch versus slow twitch muscle fibers relevant for sprinters versus endurance athletes, and you need those slow twitch to be a cyclist. The next two on my list that are pretty important are PPARGC1A. That's a long ass name, but basically this gene involves the regulation of mitochondrial biogenesis, influencing aerobic capacity and endurance, aka your VO2 max. And lastly, ACE, which variants of this gene are associated with endurance and strength. This is in turn often linked to endurance performance. So if you got a pretty good makeup of these top 3 genes that I picked, go for cycling, man, because honestly, you could be a pretty good one at best. Building off of these, if you get yourself genetically tested, you can get some really good training programs, as well as determine if you actually are going to be a good cyclist or not. You'll be able to tell what type of nutrition you need down to the T for recovery and all that, as well as helping with injury prevention. So this could tell you how much rest days you need, or if you need any at all. Personally, I don't take any rest days because I'm just that good of a cyclist. But that is also another factor as to why you may suck at cycling. If you're biking every day like I do, I like to bike 15 miles every day, did about 5,600 miles last year, your muscles are going to be fatigued and you really won't grow your muscles at all. I honestly do cycling for fun, so it really doesn't matter for people like me, but if you're trying to go pro, probably take 1 or 2 rest days. And of course, determining the genes you got and the makeup of them could turn into how good you actually are at cycling. This is what they call talent identification. This is basically what they do when a bunch of rich white guys from Europe go down to Africa to go and scout out the next Usain Bolt cycle. And lastly, I like to call the psychotic aspect of cycling. If you have competed within any type of endurance racing, especially cycling, I believe cycling is one of the most taxing endurance racing ever. Yes, and I'd say it's worse than running in some moments. There's many stories on YouTube, but basically these guys in the Tour de France are pretty much psycho with the amount of body destroying and hammering they could take all at once for sustained hours on end. If you're doing some intense cycling, probably pushing 20-25 miles an hour consistently, you think by getting better this pain will go away, but it actually doesn't. It just gets more intense because you learn how to adequate with it, or really suppress the intensity of it and just keep going. Just like any endurance sport, you have to learn how to master your mind. And if you have a weak mental health history, you probably won't really be good at cycling. Now, that is unless you got the big sad and really like to beat yourself up, go for cycling, you know? It might help you out and you could probably become a pro one day. But with all this being said, if you do try really hard at something and you really want it, and you are psychotic enough to actually want it, you're going to be a pro cyclist. Just like there are people who are 5'7" playing in the NBA, there are people who don't necessarily have the top of the top genes competing in the Tour de France and maybe even winning it. Why do you suck at cycling? Let me know down in the comments. And what did you do to overcome it? Thank you guys for watching. Leave a like and comment, make sure to subscribe, and have a great rest of your day.